Is that, as so often, the question is whether you're dealing with critics or enemies. And a lot of Australians will have heard the organiser of the protests on their national holiday talking not just about the invasion of Australia, but saying, F Australia, I hope it burns to the ground. Now, that is not the language of a critic of a country. That is somebody who's talking as an enemy.
Hello, welcome to my YouTube channel. Hope you are feeling good. Wow. Today we'll be checking out a video where Douglas Murray schooled the Indigenous people activist with hard truth. Wow. We all know Douglas always stands for the truth. It's not afraid to say the truth. So I believe this is going to be very interesting. Let's get it started. Go.
Every year on the 26th of January, millions of Aussies take to the pubs, streets and beaches to commemorate Australia Day.
Arms!
On Australia Day, we come together and celebrate our nation and all of our history.
They drink beer, enjoy Barbies and take pride in their country, its culture and achievements.
It's to celebrate everything that's good about Australia, the weather, family, friends.
It's safe, it's fun, it's Australia, it's what we do.
But of late, Australia Day elicits just as much, if not more, protest and controversy than celebration.
It's a day that's, steeped in blood. It's reminds me of violent dispossession of my people.
Why are we having this on this date, if this is the date that's upsetting so many people?
The date is a painful one for Indigenous Australians because it marks the first arrival of British settlers in 1788 and recalls past and present traumas of repression, loss, exclusion and inequality. Aboriginal people were only legally counted as being Australian as late as 1967. Some think the day should be abolished entirely. Others argue for a change in the date. The view of the current government is that by changing the date of Australia Day, you're just denying history. But the bigger question is, who decides whose history should be celebrated? Well, I'm joined now by Douglas Murray, who has written about this issue in Australia in his latest book, The Strange Death of Europe, and from Melbourne by the activist and actor Nakia Louie, a young leader within the Australian Aboriginal community. Good evening to you both. Douglas Murray, isn't it time to change Australia Day?
Well, I think a lot of Australians will wonder why and will see it as being an assault on something very foundational about their nation, and indeed it is. I mean, there's all sorts of arguments to be had about history. Nobody would or could deny the treatment and the mistreatment and maltreatment of the Aboriginal peoples. But the problem here is that, as so often, the question is whether you're dealing with critics or enemies. And a lot of Australians will have heard the organiser of the protests on their national holiday talking not just about the invasion of Australia, but saying, F Australia, I hope it burns to the ground. Now, that is not the language of a critic of a country. That is somebody who's talking as an enemy. And that sort of talk
isn't that somebody who's perhaps kind of, in the end, so frustrated by the kind of, as it were, the kind of denial?
But Australia hasn't got denial about this. Australia has had national sorry days. They've had national signings of books to say sorry, all sorts of things. Australia hasn't ignored its past.
Nakia, what do you say to that Australia has not ignored its past?
Well, I think that Douglas Murray is operating on a few false premises there. The Australian Institute recently did a study which said that the majority of Australians don't care what day Australia Day is on. So if a day that's meant to celebrate and unify the country is on a date that is dividing us, I think then we need to examine the values that we're celebrating. And you speak of that there is no denial of the history of the past of Australia. Well, there actually is, and that's one of the things why we're protesting, is that we're having our national celebrations on a day, January 26, which represents the day Captain Cook put that Union Jack in the ground in Australia and declared it sovereign, which began colonisation, which resulted in genocides, over 500 massacres just on the east coast of Australia alone, up to 90% of the Aboriginal population wiped out, and that continued well into 1967, where my parents weren't considered Australian citizens. So there is a denial when you have your national day on a day that represents such brutality.
Isn't there a situation where you can say we live in a new modern Australia made up of all sorts of peoples, and so therefore we should create something new?
Well, Australia, again, has been having this discussion for decades now. This is not a new discussion.
But then there's a new generation coming up.
Sure, but what is striking about it, as I say, first of all, is the tone of the attack on Australia Day, the tone of burn this country to the ground, which is, I think we could all agree across any...
That is incorrect. That is incorrect. That is incorrect. It's not about an attack on Australia Day. It's about changing the date.
But you don't deny that she said that. She did say that.
But this is one person. I want to actually come back to you.
The organiser.
What about Douglas? By you highlighting that, which is it's a political playing card.
But she's the organiser of the so-called Invasion Day. I mean, that is important. She wasn't
the organiser of the so-called Invasion Day, and she has said that her comments were taken out of context.
No, she has refused to apologise. She said that she said that.
Please let me finish my sentence. This is no longer a British colony. I'm a person who lives in this community.
I want to ask you about this historical hurt. I mean, how deep does it go, for example, for your generation?
Well, it continues on to this day, and that's the issue. It's that the oppression of colonisation has made Aboriginal people very vulnerable. Our life
expectancy... growing up, did you feel vulnerable growing up? Did it affect you on a daily basis?
Well, our life expectancy is 20 years below that of a non-Aboriginal Australian. Incarceration rates are much higher. The majority of Aboriginal people live in poverty. So yes, it did affect me growing up. I was someone who lived in a housing commission home. I was someone whose grandparents and parents were... my grandparents were afraid of my parents being stolen and having the children taken away.
Well, let me just...
that's something that continues through generations. You get caught in Abo.
Let me just put this to Douglas. You're in favour of, as it were, the first nation in a country having a sort of special status. So, for example, in the UK, you want to celebrate that here. If the nation is the first nation, is an Indigenous nation in Australia, surely it should have a special celebration.
Sure, and they do, and that happens.
No, but a primary one, because they are the first people of that country.
But I think what it's worth seeing is in a wider context. This very similar thing is happening in America, has happened in Canada, and basically this movement, which Australia is part of as well, is there is a movement of people who say everywhere the Europeans went, they've colonised, they've destroyed, they've wrecked, and I think we can have a sensible weighing up of the historical discussion without, if I can say so, saying that the Europeans are colonists, the Europeans are genocidists, the Europeans are still guilty, the Europeans have to keep on...
But they were colonists, that's just a fact,
yes,
they were colonists.
But the question keeps on coming down to this question as well as historical guilt and the appropriate weighing up of history. And that we hadn't had that in the past in Australia, and we don't get it with the burn Australia down stuff either.
Well, thank you both very much.
Wow. What an interesting debate. We can all tell this was really heated to an extent. And I feel the lady in question, the protester, I believe she's not being intellectually honest. She's not being intellectually honest to some extent. And I believe I'm not going to criticize them for protesting. Protesting to voice your view, to voice your opinion. I feel in an organized society, I believe that is allowed. That's allowed, but it depends on the way you express your view. It depends on the way you express your view. You don't have to express your view in a violent way. And you can tell by the statement Douglas Murray said. They were saying that they want Australia to be burned down. And I believe if you want to critique something, there are better ways of doing that. You don't have to critique something in a violent way. I believe that statement is totally unacceptable, though the lady is saying that the statement was brought out of context, that's not what she actually mean. That's what she said, but that's not what she actually mean. And if you don't want people to misinterpret what you said, you shouldn't have said that in the first place. Of course, you know, if you say something that bad, people are going to take you for your word. So right now you are saying your word is brought out of context. That's what you said, but that's not what you mean. So I don't really understand that. I understand that it is not a bad thing to engage in a protest. It's not a bad thing to voice out your opinion. It's not a bad thing to demand for your rights. But I believe there are better ways of doing that. You don't have to resort to violence. You don't have to become an extremist all because you are trying to voice out your opinion. There are better ways to address such issue with dialogue, and I believe such issue can be ironed out amicably instead of trying to resort to violence or trying to express your view, express your opinion in a violent way. I believe that is totally unacceptable in a modern society. That is totally unacceptable. There are better words she could have used, but instead she used a word as bad that she want Australia to be burned down. I don't see any relation between burn Australia down and change the date of change the national date and burn Australia. I wish Australia can be burned down, burn Australia down. I don't see any correlation in those words. I feel those words are totally apart. There's no relation. So if you want to protest for something, you want to voice out your opinion, it's better you do it the right way. So you don't go about saying people are taking your word out of context. I believe that is totally unacceptable. And you voicing your opinion that you want the national date should be changed, I don't see it as something bad. I don't see it as something bad. I feel if you are demanding for the date to be changed, you give the reason why you want the date to be changed. And there are better ways of addressing such issue. And I believe the government will be able to hear you out. But in a situation whereby you are expressing your grievance in a violent way that you want the country to be burned down, I feel that is totally unacceptable. Even the people in the country, they are going to be frightened by the world because you saying something as I wish the country can be burned down. You saying a statement by that, the country, instead of the citizen, instead of them seeing you as a fellow citizen, instead of them seeing you as a friend, instead of them seeing you as a family, they will start seeing you as an enemy, because only an enemy say something like that. Only an enemy utter a word like that burn Australia. I wish Australia can be burned down because the date that are celebrating the national day is not supposed to be so. I wish the country can be burned down. It's only an enemy that say a word like that. And the people are not going to take it lightly with you. They are not going to see you as a friend or family. They are going to see you as an enemy. I believe she is totally wrong by saying something like that. I don't care how she wants to defend herself, that her word is taken out of context, that she don't really mean that. I don't care how she wants to defend herself. But I totally believe that her saying something like that is totally wrong. It's totally unacceptable. She have to apologize to the citizen. She have to apologize to the people so they can hear her out, because I believe a word like that is something very, very, very bad. And from the point Douglas Murray has given, I totally relate to Douglas Murray. I believe the truth is hard, but sometimes someone have to say the truth. As we all know, Douglas is someone that is very articulated, sincere, honest, is always ready to stand by the truth, is not afraid to say the truth. I know a lot of people have tried to taint the name of Europe, saying Europe engaged in colonization and all that. They colonize a lot of countries, so they always associate with the name as bad, that they are bad, they are not good. And I believe history has happened way back, more than 200 years ago. And I believe one country have offended the other country in one way or the other. Not only the European people, even a state have offended a state. Even a community have offended a community. So if we are going to be talking about history, everyone has something to apologize on. It's not just the European people. It's not just the British people. It's not just the white people. If we are going to be looking at history, everyone has something to apologize about. So I believe what she's even fighting for has happened more than 200 years ago, more than 300 years ago. The generation we have now, they are ready to integrate, they are ready to coexist. No one is talking about what happened 300 years ago. And if you feel, you still feel hurt, you still feel pain by history, by what happened more than 20, 30 years ago, if you still feel hurt by that and you want the date to be changed, I believe there are better ways to address such issue instead of you protesting in a violent way. I believe if you voice your opinion out, I believe the government will be able to hear you out instead of you altering statement like you wish the country should be burned down. I feel that is totally unacceptable. I totally agree with the fact Douglas Murray have stated in this video. So I'd also like to hear your comments. Keep the conversation rolling. Don't forget, click on the subscribe button, click on the like button. Do have a nice day. Yeah.